My name is Dave Mojica from Scott Edwards Architecture, and I'm here with Miguel Camacho Serna from Place Landscape Architecture today. And we are excited to share with you our presentation on the integration of architecture and landscape architecture. The work that we're going to be showing today, we're looking at the evolution of affordable housing sites over the course of the past few decades and how the site opportunities have changed and evolved, and how in turn the opportunities for an integrated approach to creating holistic communities between architecture and landscape has also evolved. So just to introduce myself a little bit and Scott Edwards, we are proud to be a firm that is founded in community-based architecture that believes in a people-first, design-forward approach. For us, this means putting the needs of the resident first and meeting the vision of the goals in the neighborhoods of the communities we work in. We accomplish this through a listening process with our clients that includes a variety of community engagement strategies, and we cater those strategies to the development teams, the potential residents, the jurisdictions we work in, and we really take the time to listen to those communities and kind of customize those strategies, because we don't believe there is a single strategy that necessarily applies, but I think the most important thing is that we identify the need for community-based engagement. The result is a collaborative approach between developers, the design teams, and local jurisdictions that lead to holistic social and physical contextual understanding, and give us the opportunity to create innovative housing solutions.
Whoop. I got this one. Good morning, everyone. And again, thank you for your patience. My name is Miguel Camacho. I'm a landscape architect and principal at Place. We are a interdisciplinary international design studio. And our engagement is through landscape architecture, art, and urban design. And similar to Scott Edwards, our design ethos is guided by the relationships we build with our clients, with our collaborators, and we do it through a commitment to social impact. And we use stewardship, art, and community to do that. And we always are exploring and investigating, developing our designs through a sense of creativity, expertise, and heart. And we're very excited to talk to you today, as mentioned, about this interaction between landscape architecture and architecture, and how we can apply those to the communities that we're helping come forward. So as part of that commitment, one of the tools that we've used is developing a series of design principles that kind of help us define goals and measure ourselves against those goals if we're meeting them. And these are adaptable in their own way, and but we try to always pay attention to the site context, to find ways of incorporating art and cultural meaning to the projects, and then just building a lot of flexibility and diversity of spaces, that it's not just seen as as the eternal struggle as landscape architects, shrub it up, come in at the end. No, let's be part of the conversation from the beginning and help define what those spaces are, what the needs are, and then just integrate everything together.
So today our exploration will focus on 3 case studies from 3 different contextual typologies. So the first one is the Mary Ann that's located in Old Town Beaverton. It's our kind of traditional, I think for many, many years, approach to affordable housing, that we were focusing on urban centers that had site opportunities ranging from quarter block to half block to full block sites. The second one is are these larger opportunities that we've seen in urban neighborhoods that are kind of more the scale of a super block, but they are the scale of 4 to 6 blocks. Today, that case study will be on Rockwood Village. And the end of our presentation, we want to share our Mahonia Crossing community that has currently under construction with Girding Builders, in Salem, Oregon. And that one is housing 312 units under construction in a very dense suburban context. So over the course of the decades, we have seen this site opportunity change and evolve. And we're hopeful that today, as we go through this presentation, that strategies that we've taken to create homes and to create an integrated approach to placemaking that this will inspire developers and design teams to kind of question how we explore this new terrain as we see the evolution into rural environments where there are site opportunities that are small and there are site opportunities that are very large scale master planning development opportunities with challenge sites. So to start us, I think we're going to start with, I think the one that we are all most familiar with, placemaking in urban centers. So the Beaverton project, the Mary Ann, it is a Reach CDC project, and the site is located on Main and First. The site is located between the local high school that you see to the left, and it's on the western edge of the kind of old town downtown core. This particular site is actually, it has very walkable amenities. It's got a strong context. There was a lot of urban development that had already happened recently in the years leading up to this. So this was the first Metro bonded project. It houses 46 residents. And the approach to these types of developments on these half block and full block sites, the focus has historically been on zero lot line buildings that have street engagement. The ironic part when it comes to providing housing is that the way that the development code for these jurisdictions is often written is that it's really trying to create an activated streetscape, and it was really geared towards that idea of mixed use, that there is a mixed use component on the ground floor, the kind of vision for retail and restaurant. And a lot of times that vision of program doesn't necessarily align with the needs of the residents and the type of environment that we're creating. So on these affordable housing projects, through the years of work that we have done, design teams, not just SEA, but across the board in the state of Oregon and outside, we really asked ourselves, how do you create an activated, warm streetscape when you don't have that mixed use component? So the first kind of traditional takeaway from this was really creating these activated corners, that we're respecting the desire for these local jurisdictions to have these activated street corners that are highly visible, but at the same time, they provided an opportunity where we could create these warm, welcoming lobbies that have a direct connection to the outward-facing community, that we can program these warm lobbies with direct visual connection to resident services, that they have kind of eyes on the street, and then they also are there to kind of engage with the community from a visual standpoint. On the Mary Ann project, this kind of idea presented an opportunity on the primary corner on First and Main. On the second corner, what was interesting about this project, being the first Metro bonded project, the city of Beaverton was highly engaged with us in regards to programming and what their desires were for the project. So in collaboration with them, as well as with Reach CDC, we spent a lot of time talking about the fact that you've got a half block building, your lobby is only going to be so big. What else are you going to put in this building? So where we landed were there were two components on the ground floor that were a little bit unique to this project. The first one was on this corner of the building, we decided to create a flex space. And the idea here was that it wasn't a community room solely for the residents, but that it was a community room that could be shared between the residents, the local jurisdiction, and other communities or other community-based service providers in the area. So over the years, since this building is open, this space has been used for community activities that are both with Reach CDC, outward-facing service providers, and it's been used for things like administering vaccinations, getting people registered for health insurance, and that it creates this flexible space that is engaging with the community, and the city of Beaverton is also able to use it as a meeting room for other kind of needs. So it was a way to connect the building physically with opportunities for engagement outside of solely residents inside of the building. Between these two corners, there it goes. We located a series of ground level units. So this was in response to two things. The first one was the need to have, to fulfill the need for housing on this development, that we needed to provide additional units on the ground floor as well as the upper floors to meet the housing need. But it also provided an opportunity for us, an opportunity to say, well, street facing ground level units provide a different type of living experience than living above. And how can we create a different but equitable environment there? So a lot of times when we've done street ground level units in the past, we've done them elevated on a platform in a stoop. The downside of that is that we recognize that we wouldn't be able to create an accessible unit that way. So if somebody says, well, I like the fact that I can have a unit that is engaging directly into the urban environment, like some people just want that garden. They don't want to ride in an elevator every day that they go up, but they potentially want a different experience. So we asked ourselves, if we do units on the ground floor that are accessible and have direct access connection, well, how do you create this idea of home and ownership? So through really simple strategies of just stepping away that building facade a little bit back and then we didn't want to create a gate because sometimes a gate can feel like a barrier rather than it feeling like a sense of security. So we thought, well, why don't we just create this series of elevated planters, give a little bit of breathing room. The idea wasn't necessarily to create a patio space for people to live in, but an idea of creating a small separation between the public and private realm and creating a sense of entry for the residents. So in this, you can see when we do zero lot line buildings, a lot of times our landscape integration story is very much isolated to the streetscape. But the good news was on these projects, the result on the half block and full block projects was that we had the opportunity to create these courtyards, that they naturally led themselves to these U-shaped buildings and an opportunity for a courtyard expression. And on this project, we chose to kind of think of this, what we're showing as that kind of darker C shape on the bottom diagram, to think of it as an urban oasis, that you can create a building facade in a courtyard that has a very different expression than your street expression. And then it can start to create this sort of urban oasis for the residents that, unlike the purpose of the ground floor engaging with the street, that this is an opportunity to create an area that has flexible outdoor play areas, that the concept here was creating kind of an open green lawn on the upper floor with some seating areas so that Reach and the service providers could bring out temporary play equipment, but when kids aren't out there 24/7, but they'd also be able to pack that play equipment up and then use it for other activities. And I think historically, the idea of creating this outdoor space is to create an indoor-outdoor experience. And we provided a community room here that, it functions in a way that it can hold large engagements, but the idea being that it is a place where multiple generations of people that live in the building can come in, they can hold art classes, cooking classes, etc. But this was sort of our opportunity in urban environments. That in the urban environment, we had the opportunity for the courtyard typology and kind of these kind of special urban oases. So as we kind of go on in our presentation, I think the sort of takeaways for us here, you can see the strategy for community engagement on this project was really focused on work with Reach CDC because they really know their potential residents and clients, or residents that are moving into the building, and working with the local jurisdiction because they had a very strong vision on what Old Town Beaverton would be like. And so I'm going to turn this to Miguel, who is going to talk about how that sort of potential for integrated indoor-outdoor experience has evolved as the context and the site opportunities increased.
Thank you. So we're going to move a little bigger scale, and we'll talk to you about the Rockwood Village development out in Gresham. So it's located on 182nd and Yamhill, and it's kind of like a jump in scale. We talked about the zero lot line block versus now we're talking more like the scale of a super block, basically 4 to 6 city blocks. And as mentioned, one of the first things we start looking at is really the context and what are we responding to, what are the needs, what are the other services, amenities, or lack thereof that are in the region. And so this is a very important site in the east side. We have the Rockwood. It's the other Rockwood. What is it called? The Rockwood. Sorry, the Rockwood Rising. It's just we always work with the working titles, and then I need to readjust. A very important urban plaza and community space there near the transit, the MAX station. And then we have the city hall, the Multnomah County courthouse. And in this original site, we had basically an underutilized park that was within private property, and it was only accessible to a school and other education centers that were there. And trying to address this need for housing, we had Vance Park also in the vicinity, but there was kind of like this need for more open space. And we work with Vector Architects and CDT, and also in collaboration with Hacienda CDC. And the challenges for the site were that there's an open space overlay, and so the need was really to maximize the open space. And working with the city and the county, it was an interesting approach of how the architecture was going to function more as a framework and step a little bit more into the background and let that open space be the foreground, be the point of interest, not just for the development, but truly for the larger community. The approach is, again, basically working with that super block and try to break it up into smaller pieces, trying to work with the urban grid. And one of the elements was that we needed to start thinking about that connectivity north to south with the addition of a street bisecting the site with a future connection to the county courthouse. That would be part of a future development, but trying to set up the stage for that connectivity. So that was a good synergy with the county to think of ways that we could achieve that. And again, this idea of the donut, if you will, that we concentrated parking and vehicular circulation on the outer edges of the site. The architecture also helping us create that articulation of the space, and then all the community events, all the community spaces happen in the interior, and taking advantage of that street that we figured out a way to pull the neighborhood through that street. And so that was always in our minds of how do we announce to the community that this space is there and it's available for them, that it doesn't feel like you're entering private property, but it truly becomes a community asset. So the program of the, sorry, this is not, does this work? There you go. The basic organizer of the open space revolves around two elements, basically a community building that is kind of like a jewel piece in the middle of the open space, and it provides multi-use open spaces for meetings and gatherings. These ideas of community building elements, such as the community gardens, play areas for children, and then the preservation of an existing grove of trees that, it's always a great opportunity to save those trees. And you have kind of like this history of the site. You have this day one character that the vegetation can add to it and create these more passive and picnic areas. And then again, with the architecture in the background, kind of creating that backdrop, while also very, very elegantly and sophisticatedly articulated, but really letting the open space be that centerpiece. Speaking of that street and how we address the idea of guiding the community to use the space, we also worked with the idea of art, incorporating art. And so these sculptural elements became like a wayfinding and identity element that kind of very, they try to be present at the south corner and then draw people in as a way to read that there's something going on further up. And then even continuing beyond, the idea is that we would have this connection to the parking to the north, to the courthouse, and we work with Mudbone Grown, an organization that promotes community agriculture in the city, and provide basically a community farm that would create that use of that space and it's been very successful to the point that they're producing so much food that one of the bike rooms that we have on the originally in the buildings was transformed into a food pantry. That was kind of like something that had not been um, uh, anticipated for, and the need is and the need and the offer is so great that now that's its main function. So it's been great working with them, and Place helped articulate that site planning and how to make it efficient and address other programmatic needs that they have in terms of buildings and greenhouses and things. So really the lesson learned from this really revolves around a good community engagement process that we work with Vector, CDP, Hacienda, CPID, and Place, so that it's not just another project. There was this sentiment that why is all the affordable housing going to the East County, and why is it the only development that we're getting? And through the community engagement, we were able to talk to the community, understand their needs, understand their concerns, and really focus that we're not just sticking you with a development. We're providing a community asset that is going to benefit everybody, and truly feel like it's contributing to that community building, and paying a lot of attention to what those needs are, and then just responding to those. So that's the biggest lesson learned, and we're very proud and very excited about the future of this place. Talking to people that grew up in the area, they feel like it's really transforming. It's not the old Rockwood neighborhood that they used to know. So in our evolution, now we're going to talk a little bit more about taking it to a larger scale and more on a more suburban context. So let me get back to Dave.
So I think this next project, Mahonia Crossing, it is a two-phase project that is housing. It's a community for all ages, so it's servicing both families and seniors on a single development. It's providing 313 homes, targeted to open next year. When we looked at sort of the themes of this year's conference, this project in particular was the one that we thought had the most applicability for lessons learned for how we potentially approach rural communities moving forward. The reasons for that are, you'll see as we go through this, there's a lot of themes from our work in urban centers and urban neighborhoods that we actually found a lot of parallels as we kind of reflected back, that there's a lot of parallels in the ways that we engage with community, the ways that architecture and landscape can respond to creating a sense of home. In addition to that, the site in this particular area is very challenged, as we are finding in many of our rural areas, that this is a site that's trying to serve 300 create 300 units. And it has a 20-foot grade drop from one end of the site to the other. And so the question is, like, how do you mitigate that? How do you mitigate that? Keep it cost effective so that we can provide as many homes as possible, but also at the same time create a quality place of living. And I think lastly, some of the rural opportunities that have come are large scale master planning projects. And I think a lot of times we think that creating large scale housing means that we have to create an environment that's very repetitive. And I think, how do we create an environment that has a diverse experience while still being able to serve that population in a cost-effective way, so that we can maximize our housing opportunities? So this site is located, unlike the other two sites, in a very suburban context in Salem. This suburban neighborhood, you can see it's almost exclusively single family homes on all sides of this 20 plus acre site. It is the work predominantly of John Miller from Wildwood Mahonia, who has worked on this property for decades. So he's created the single family community that is predominantly middle and middle upper class families. And he had reserved this large site in the middle of this development for multifamily many, many years ago. And as he's kind of gone through his career, he had realized that to see a vision for this multifamily site fully realized, that he needed to find a partner to do it. So he partnered with community development partners, or he reached out to them and eventually sold the site to them. And the reasoning was a shared philosophy that this middle middle upper class community would benefit from an affordable housing multifamily development to create a diverse community. And so, since they share that same philosophy, this partnership was formed. And in addition to that, there was a strong sensibility for natural preservation and attention to sustainability. So, the kind of two images that you see at the top in that row of three, that A and B image, that's the park to the south of the site that John Miller had a huge involvement in creating, and then the other one is actually some of that natural preservation area to the north of the site. And then the last image there is sort of the kind of types of builds of single family residential that you're seeing in the area. As you would imagine in a neighborhood that is, that is a strong, tight knit community, these families purchased their homes, a few decades ago, 2 to 3 decades ago, and they have raised their families there. They have used this green space that is the site as a kind of a playground for their children. And so, in light of that, the community engagement for this was very different than the past two projects that we talked about. On Rockwood 10, there was a large collaboration with CPID and Hacienda CDC, and they really facilitate a lot of community engagement with potential users, the community. The first project we talked about was a lot of engagement with the city. This one was unique because the individual homeowners were very active. And I think historically, the approach, I think, on the development end has been if you have an active, sort of scary neighborhood and HOA, you kind of run away from them and you hide as much as possible. On this project, because John is so tightly knit into the community, he had told CDP and the development team that he really wanted a more personal engagement. And this engagement with the neighbors, it really came down to specifically to the ones surrounding the perimeter. It was a one-on-one engagement that we actually, on this project, we recognize that we have to take the time to actually meet with these independent neighbors, explain to them, they don't just understand the black and white drawing they get in the mailer pamphlet. Like, sit down with them, explain to them what the development was that is coming. And because these people bought their home, they raised their children, and they're going to retire in them. And now they are going to have a multifamily development behind them. And what we found was through this engagement process, their asks were very small. And their asks were simple things like, this house is behind me. I want a fence. This building is going to be behind me. I don't want a bright white building glaring into my house. Like, we actually found that through the process of working with them, that explaining to them the need for the housing, explaining them the type of kind of environment that we're going to be creating for them, that once they understood the vision, they were actually very supportive of it. And we are now engaging with the local elementary school as well to create artwork for the interiors of this building. So I think to kind of start this off, the idea, I think the reason I'm honing into this so much is because the activism that we see in these really strong, tight knit suburban communities is not that different than the activism that we see in tight knit rural communities where people have grown up there, they live there. And even though in those communities, the site may not be right adjacent to their house, they are very active in their community and how they see their cities changing. So on this project, we looked at what are the traditional approaches to providing housing in these suburban communities. Often they are these 3-story walk-up typologies. They're generally open breezeway corridors with a single entrance. And historically, from an efficiency standpoint, they've been put on a grid, right? Like, they've been put on a grid, and we say that's the most efficient for parking. It's the most efficient for providing the number of units. But where this model fails is it doesn't really have a lot of attention on how are you creating a sense of community, right? Like, people park, they go into their building, they go into their unit. What are the opportunities for engagement with their neighbors? And they're very minimal. So from an architectural standpoint, we started asking ourselves, well, what is an approach we could take to the building massing alone to start and start breaking down this massing so that it has a better response to the single family home, so that we're providing a transition from coming off of the main road, you're going through this development, and then you're going to the single family residential neighborhood. What are different strategies, and how do we work with gable roofs? How do we maybe turn these buildings 90 degrees? But I think the most important thing that we realized was that we asked ourselves is, why are we only providing one entrance to these buildings? So, for the upper floors, we all will always need we'll need a stair and a primary access, but we said, we're not taking advantage of the sides of these buildings. And so we started saying, you can see on the top two diagrams at the end there, we started asking ourselves, well, for these ground level units, is there an opportunity to provide ground level access to those units like we did on the Marianne project, but in a very different way, that we can create this kind of side access that's different than the primary entrance, and through that, rearrange the buildings in a way that those side entrances are facing each other and that they can act as more of a kind of a patio in the way that single family homes on a cul-de-sac work. And that, the idea here was providing the opportunity for residents to, I live in a unit, you have a unit across the street, and that this little pedestrian access point that pulls you into the development, that can be a place where kids play in a similar way that kids play in a cul-de-sac. And so in arranging these in more of a side-by-side kind of diagram, we brought back sort of the thinking that we saw in the work that Place was doing with Wechter on Rockwood 10, this kind of concept of perimeter parking, and the fact that it would open it up to an opportunity for kind of a large scale green space, sort of the way that on a very large scale that courtyards were functioning to bring community together in our urban environments. So I'm going to let Miguel talk a little bit more about the site organization and how these sort of diagrammatic concepts kind of came to fruition on a real design.
On Jurassic Park, when they say, welcome to Jurassic Park, this is the part where we talk about the integration of landscape architecture. And so thank you for your patience. So, this last thing that Dave was talking about in terms of the opportunities to address the different sides of the building and create additional entries really opened up this idea of, okay, let's look at the circulation and let's look at how those buildings will interact with the open space. So organizationally, the site, we first identified the vehicular circulation and parking, the things that we have to still meet, but that take up the most space and that start defining that arrival experience and that interaction with the adjacent neighborhoods. So after we design and define those vehicular systems, similar to what we showed in Rockwood Village, there's a ring of parking on the perimeter that is very intentionally and heavily landscaped, so that it's, for many people, that's the first thing you do in the morning when you go to work. You get in your car and then you drive out. That we wanted that experience to start your day really well. And then when you come home and you park, that you're not trying to cram into a compact space. And then that when you get out of your car, you're able to walk to your house, and that it's a nice experience. So that we're kind of thinking a lot about that user experience. So with the perimeter definition of that vehicular circulation, we also then identified, especially for phase 2 on the left side of, how do we enter those smaller lots and feed off that main spine, if you will, on the vehicular road in between. And then really start looking at the interaction between the buildings, and those porches or entrances kind of create that sense of neighborhood, that as you're going into your house, you see movement, you see people walking by, there's eyes on the street, or in this case on the open space. But it also creates those opportunities for interaction, that you're going to see your neighbors, that you're in proximity, you have your areas well defined, but there's that opportunity for activity, and also for connections, not only to the open spaces and the amenities of the site, but also to the other areas, and especially like going over to phase 2 or moving north-south through the site. And in thinking about that, we also distributed the amenities throughout the site, so that, again, we create opportunities for moving from one area to the other, so that you're not just always in your building, but that you have reasons to interact with your neighbors. So that the community building in purple at the top there kind of generates that flow, that traffic to move north-south, but then different services like laundry in different buildings that, that also create that opportunity for movement. And then from the standpoint of the senior living, we also wanted to provide choices. So on phase one, there's a building that is dedicated for senior living, but it's not the only choice. Like if you don't want to be in the middle of it all, there's opportunities on the ground level on the phase two, so that you can have a little bit more quiet, a little bit more reserved experience, but really being very deliberate about, if you're going to go from the south buildings to the community center, you'll go through the senior building, and then you'll create those opportunities for interaction, for truly multi-generational communities that get to exchange experiences and activities with each other. And then, the landscape really strives to reinforce all those dynamics. And with the tree canopy, we try to provide a lot of wayfinding and identity definition, so that there's a very deliberate character for the streets, the vehicular areas on the perimeter, and then different moments as you're entering the site in between the buildings, to create corridors that have their own identity, their own character, and also take advantage of all these existing trees that we're preserving, and that those also provide wayfinding in terms of where the entries are, where the feature elements are, and then just accent trees here and there to have feature areas. On the underside, on the understory side, there's also this idea of create a typology for the walk-up buildings, for the community areas, and then for the parking areas, and then also trying to think about maintenance and adaptability. We're using a lot of native species. We're trying to think about something that's going to be easy to manage for the company managing the housing development. And then again, that attitude towards the edges and taking advantage of the existing vegetation we have there, needs for like stormwater management, that they also become feature gardens, celebrating these amazing oaks that we have on the site that we were able to preserve, and letting those elements also inform the landscape as elements of identity and culture and cultural pride. So back to you.
So the way that the architecture and the landscape architecture approach to this development kind of come together, it provides this opportunity for a sustainable community that is, as I mentioned earlier, it's on a very challenged site with a 20-foot grade drop. And the approach to working with multiple smaller buildings, it creates more flexibility on site placement. And so it wasn't, it's kind of merging this concept that we brought earlier about community placemaking, but at the same time, it is also responding to very much the context of the physical environment that we have to work in. Oops. But at the end of the day, what we really were focusing on here was this concept of what is the experience as you go through the development. So at the bottom here is a section cut through the street, and the team spent a lot of time studying what this elevation trajectory is. And the reason this particular one was so important to us is because this is the main access, this new road that we're creating that comes through the development is the main access to the adjacent single family neighborhoods. So we wanted to create an experience as residents are coming home, not just to this development, but to the adjacent development that makes sense to transition from this large scale housing community to the single family residential. So as you pull into the development, the first building that we have is our community center, and it's backdropped by a series of large old oak trees, and we really went through a lot of effort to save as many of the existing oak trees on the site and utilizing them in a way that it's also providing screening to the largest building, which is the senior building behind it. So this was a concept of kind of welcoming to this neighborhood with the smallest of the buildings, backdropping it with the largest building, but also utilizing the natural elements that we have on the site to screen. As you continue down, that senior building kind of reveals itself on the edge there, but we chose to orient it with its shortest side facing the street and then transition to the smallest of our 3-story walk-ups. So the approach to the 3-story walk-ups from an architectural standpoint was really creating these kind of elevated patios that were responding to the grade change, doing a warm toned base, and then working with these sort of forward facing gables to start breaking down that scale as you transition to single family residential. And then this is a view as you exit and then transition into the neighborhoods. We also recognize that there's a secondary experience that exists here. So the section cut that you're seeing at the bottom, this is cutting through the community building to what on the left is the north of the property and cutting through the park all the way to the south of the property on the kind of on the phase 1 lot to the top. So this experience was really important to us because this is where the largest amount of large scale community engagement opportunities were on the development. And so we, I think we initially started by focusing on what is the experience of this community room. So, I think we have a large, for many of the development teams, the designers, we have a large history of designing community rooms, right? That they can hold teaching classes, that they are flexible, that they are warm. But this community room opens out to a hardscaped plaza area that has, to the left that you don't see in the image here, there is a community garden. It's got a learning garden with edible plants, and then we worked with a place to create this sort of stepped plaza seating area. So the idea was that we're creating a plaza that is now bound between the community center, and then on the opposite side, that it is that kind of plaza edge is held by the senior building. So we really wanted to take the senior building as a component that can be kind of the heart and the center of this development. Oftentimes, when we've worked with senior housing on large scale developments, they tend to be sort of at the edges of the community, and there's not really strong engagement with how we're engaging them with the family building. So this concept was, let's use the community building and the senior building to kind of create this plaza and make it a feature moment that the building itself is acting as a transition and a gateway into a green park. So rather than thinking, we of course had the opportunity to create a much larger green park, but we wanted to create a variety of spaces. So the idea with the Hardscape Plaza was that this can be an area that, if the community wanted to have an event, they can put out tables, they can bring in food carts, that there's that it's a very different experience than the kind of green space that you're seeing poking out under this 2-story opening. There's a glass bridge that you see crossing between on the second floor of the senior building, and that was intentionally placed there because we recognize that seniors have various levels of engagement they want to have with the community. And in this particular building, a lot of the design team, we thought about our parents, we thought about our grandparents, and we thought about activities that they like to do. And a lot of seniors like to people watch. And we thought that this was actually a fun opportunity. We've got this great plaza to the left, we've got this green space to the right, and we thought this is a great opportunity to take advantage of what was originally just a walkway and create some kind of small lounge seating, that this can be an area where seniors, maybe they don't want to be outside in the park, right? Maybe they have they have some mobility issues, but they still want to be able to watch. They want to be able to watch multiple generations. They want to be able to see children playing outside, and that it's a way that they can visually engage with the community should they choose to. On the other side, the senior building takes on a little bit of that C shape, similar to the Marianne project we showed in the beginning, but it has the opportunity to work with these other 3-story walk-ups to create these kind of barbecue areas and ultimately open up to this sort of bosque garden that place has sort of envisioned for the green spaces beyond. So the concept here is taking, that we can have a wide variety of experiences on these sites, that I think there's more that we can do with them than just the grid of buildings that we showed in that initial diagram. And so the hope here is that for development teams and design teams, I think, we all do a good job of looking at the precedents of the types of environments we work in. And we're hopeful that this presentation kind of shows how our collective work in the past sort of sites and environments we've worked in that they can influence the way that we choose to work in rural environments moving forward. So I think that's everything that we've got for you today. And so we'll open up to questions if anybody has any.
I'll hold it for you.
I'm curious if the neighborhood at large uses this space as well. So the existing community that was there before, are they gardening in the community garden? Are they a part of the community center? Are they kind of coming into this space like they used to in generations before, now that it's built?
Yes, the goal is that it will be. It's not just for the development, and the community gardens always present an opportunity. Let's not call it a challenge, but yeah, it requires a lot of management, right? So we have limited space, and sometimes there's wait lists and things like that. But the idea is that we want to make sure that they get used. And so sometimes it happens that people sign up for it and they don't use it, and like, all right, who's next? And you can try to keep it going. But yeah, the idea again is to extend it to the general community.
And the park on this project and on Rockwood 10, neither of them are closed off to the community. So really anybody can come walk their dog. Not surprisingly, many of the residents had garden beds on this property for many years. And so CDP has been great about talking to them independently about potentially letting them have a plot in the community garden for this development should they want. So.
Question. Are there any other communities like this? I feel like
there is, I think they have 1 or 2 under construction. I know there's one in St. Helens that is currently under construction. This is the largest of the ones that Community Development Partners is currently exploring.
Thank you. So with LIHTC projects, a lot of the time you can't have activity spaces on site that are available to parties outside of the community itself. So how do you kind of create a community space with having to balance that where like you can't share it, at least on paper, you can't share it?
So this development likely on this one, the Marianne was different. It was an exception. This one, the community building itself will likely be just for the development. I think in general, though, we haven't, I mean, the developer on this one, they are open to leaving the green spaces open for the community to engage with. But in general, I'm unfamiliar with requirements on the open space not being accessible. Is that what you're kind of implying as well, that both the enclosed spaces and the open spaces can't be accessible?
My understanding is just any space that's technically within the partnership, the ownership entity that was kind of funded through the tax credit equity.
One thing that I know that was part of this working with City of Salem was the easement for access, right? So I think that it's kind of a given that people are going to be traversing from the neighborhood to the west across this site to get to Battle Creek on the east side.
Yeah, so I think I understand your question clearer now. So for this project in Rockwood 10, these are not private streets, they're public streets. And so therefore the engagement of kind of the building face, that interstitial space between the building, it's very much the way that we were engaging in urban environments, that we're paying careful attention to the streetscape. So I think the opportunities when you are bound within the site and you can't give that community access is that you have to pay extra attention to that interstitial landscape space that you do have between the building and the right of way, and how is the building architecture engaging. So I think that's where, you know, when we're faced with those challenges, I actually think that the precedent that we can and should be looking to is how did we achieve that in urban environments? Because in the urban environment, everything is internal and your only opportunity is that streetscape. So I think it's a challenge that I think will continue to evolve, but the opportunities for that engagement are really, how are you dealing with that right of way? Because that is where your engagement is for both the landscape and the building.
So I have a question just about how you approach outdoor furniture selection and choices, and just how do you balance that the outdoor furniture that's flexible and not fixed and can be used by the community, but tends to maybe walk away or get lost, versus fixed. I see in this picture specifically, there's looks like those fixed benches. But how do you approach that balance of trying to choose outdoor seating and furniture options that will work for the community while also being not need to be maintained or replaced?
Yeah, that's a interesting question that, yes, we are faced with. And our first drawings, we always show a loose furniture. And then at some point we have to have a conversation, right? And goes back to management and goes back to, especially with, people from the outside potentially using the space, then it just really becomes an issue. So the way that we articulate not just the furnishings, but the overall flexibility of those open spaces is we try to build a structure so that if you don't have any furniture, you still have seat walls, or you have kind of like something that defines the space so that it can function without them. And then being very selective, and that this is something that sometimes takes a couple of iterations to get it right. But yes, like this idea on the under the bridge for the senior building, that at first we're like, oh, this would be a great place to like put all these chess tables and have people playing there, and then we have to kind of like adjust and like, well, this is going to be an access here, this is going to be in the way. And so it's a process. But then yeah, it becomes about strategic placement, and yes, fixed furnitures that it has to be the right fixture so that it provides as much flexibility as we can, like as simple as leaving an open space for a wheelchair, or making sure that it's not in a spot where it's going to get a lot of sun, and it's not going to be in the way. So it's part of the finesse of the design. And but yes, also working with the management and the desire of, no, we want this to be, and we'll take care of it, versus I don't want any headaches, so let's just make it as simple as possible. So,
and I think to add to that, so on the images we showed you earlier, what part of the strategy on this site was yes, you have the challenge of a 20-foot grade drop, but it also provides an opportunity. And that's why we elected in that plaza area to do this idea of these like stadium seats around the oak trees. In the final iteration, there are kind of a series of like seating walls that people can sit on. So the first part is capitalizing on any opportunity we have to create something with something that is essential to the project, right? You need the retaining wall. So if you need the retaining walls, there's something that we can integrate at kind of a low cost. On this project and many of our projects, to be honest, what usually happens is we end up with fixed furniture. The remaining furniture ends up fixed, it ends up bolted to the ground. Generally speaking, we found that is the best strategy. The hardest part with that is, if you're trying to create like a table situation, like people can't like scoot their chair in. So that's always a little bit of a negotiation. On the properties like the Marianne, where we had, it's a community room and you have to go through the community room to get there. When it's really controlled, it's a controlled environment, it's small. Those are the places where we've been able to have loose furniture, and it's been less of a problem because it's monitored and that room can be locked and there's no access. On a property like this, they did elect to do all fixed furniture though. I think,
so it's kind of, you're talking about those different community spaces and those different, you said there was like the purple dot thing came up. I'm just curious, was that program something you guys brought into it? Like, hey, this isn't part of your main scope, but these little ideas, and what are those spaces kind of used for? I was just kind of intrigued because you had the community center, but then you had a bunch around site.
So whenever we look at our community spaces, whether they're distributed on a large site like this or on a 6-story building, part of the reason we like looking at a distributed approach is because it provides an opportunity for residents to have passive engagement. So the concept behind that is that if I live on the 5th floor, but there's a specific type of amenity on the 4th floor, then I'm going to go to another floor and maybe I'm going to pass my neighbor. So it's giving that sense of community just through, you see the person every day you go to do laundry, right? On this development, the purple dots, we always start with kind of what's essential for the project. And the laundry rooms, when they're shared amenities, they're a really great opportunity. And on this project, because the site is so big, that was the first thing we started with. Oftentimes, we like to provide the residents in the laundry rooms with an opportunity, at least a seating area and a folding table. Most residents, what we've found in our community engagement is that they don't want to leave their laundry, right? Like they have a fear of that. So we, at minimum, try to provide that seating. On this development, a couple of those areas we've expanded the seating area and that it functions more. We've got a lounge area as well. And then it's got a little TV. It has Wi-Fi access so that people can come in there and use it. Other areas in this building, on the senior building, they have their own dedicated community rooms so that if the seniors want to get together and they want to have their own kind of place, they can do that. Adjacent to that, because that area is so central, we chose to also add a fitness area to the building. And we located it in the senior building on the ground floor. So that way it's accessible by the family, by the younger generations so they can access it, but it's also really easily accessible by the seniors. And the idea and the hope was that, seniors will pass that on a daily basis. And the hope was that they will be more encouraged to use it. So that kind of placement, thinking about the end user. And then I think a couple of the other laundry lounges, the concept of kind of adding the Wi-Fi in these expanded rooms was the sense that those are probably families or younger people that are trying to, they've just gotten into job placement and maybe they want to do their laundry, but they want an opportunity to work. That those can also be kind of study rooms, that they have a multi-purpose function, and you're not really having to add a lot of square footage, right? Like all we're adding is expanding that room that we're probably people are sitting in anyways, and just providing that extra Wi-Fi and some simple furnishings.
Just curious with Rockwood Village having been open for a year or two now, curious about kind of lessons learned and if any on the landscape design front, and curious if any particular area is not used as much or is as anticipated, or if there was a lack or you didn't provide enough of something, just it's so much space. I'm just curious to hear on that front. Yeah.
From what I've been able to observe, it's been very successful. They're one of the success stories, as mentioned, is with the community garden, the community farm on the north side that had that impact. But we've been there a couple of times, and yes, there's always kids playing in the playgrounds, and it's always great to see. You come up with certain elements, and then you see the kids playing in ways that, like, oh, I never thought that they would use it like that, or like, oh, you know what, we had to put that loose material, and now it's all over the place because they're grabbing it and moving it around. So there's refinements like that you can learn about. I think that some of the biggest challenges is, and we mentioned it for this one in terms of the planting, is that and this affects everybody. We were there in the summer after those hot spells, and lawn areas sometimes don't look as green and beautiful as they look for a few months when it's really dry, and some of the trees didn't make it as we were planting them. But that's more of that coordination with our landscape contractors and our specifications, and just being more deliberate about certain setting ourselves for more successful planting strategies and things like that. So that's something that's always on our mind. How do we improve that? But there's always challenges with maintenance and resources that have, and so it's important to do it during the project definition, so that we're designing towards the realities of, like, I want to make it beautiful, and then like, oh, how am I going to manage this? And then that vision never comes to fruition because there was a disconnect there. And so we really try to work with not only the management, but the people that are going to be just policing is not the right word. They're going to be managing the community gardens or the landscape areas. Do they have a maintenance crew from the outside? Is that something that if it changes, it's going to compromise the landscape design? But yeah, I mean, it's been great. We're happy about it.
And I think outside of Rockwood 10, I think what we've noticed in our work with Place is they do an exceptional job of connecting with the resident services to truly understand what is their maintenance plan, understanding from the developer what level of commitment and finances are you willing to put into maintaining your landscape. On this particular development, we even went through a phase where we're like, this is a really sophisticated landscape plan. Are you going to be able to maintain it? And they said, well, this project's so big that, you know, property management, which on this one it's Guardian, they said they are going to have a landscape crew out there 3 days a week anyway. So they're like, there's no point in revising it. Whereas I think sometimes when we work on the smaller properties, it's a little bit different because they're only going to bring a crew out there maybe once a week, maybe once every other week. And so I think that conversation is different. The other thing that I will say from a post-occupancy standpoint that we have noticed is often the warranty walk for landscape tends to get overlooked and forgotten at the 1 year mark. And it's really important to think about when your plantings are going in and you're getting TCO, because oftentimes what we see is a project's opening up in December. So effectively they planted all their plantings. You know, when we design it, we have an idea of when they're going to start opening, but oftentimes, sometimes schedules get pushed, right? So what you thought was going to get planted in June is now getting planted in November. And then it's on a steeper area. And then all of a sudden the rain comes and those plants you have a collection of bushes at the bottom. And so I think that 1 year warranty walk and just being aware of, you know, do you have to change your strategy because the schedule changed, and kind of what is that level of engagement? So
just real quick, I wanted to ask a little bit more about parking, and if you have an ideal ratio of either number of units or number of bedrooms to parking spots, and if that's ever like a source of tension with neighbors, like you don't want to dedicate too much of the development to parking, but neighbors are worried about overflow parking, and also like even location of parking spots. I love the parking around the perimeter, but do residents ever complain that they have to walk too far from their car to their door?
I can take this one a little bit. So yes, parking is always a concern. I think in suburban environments, urban environments, everyone's always like, where are these people going to park? We do always ask, the very first question we ask to our development teams is, what does their current research data show for ownership of cars per number of residents? I'm happy to take your information. I can actually pull what we concluded for these. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio. So we have been finding that historically speaking, it is lower than a 1-to-1 ratio car ownership. On this particular development, we did try to give more parking than what we traditionally give in urban environments because it doesn't have that high access to public transit. And I have been noticing on the affordable project specifically that, you know, we are still trying to provide parking even though the parking minimum has dropped to 0, right? And so I think the strategy of, you know, we have to recognize that these people are coming with cars. I want to say, Miguel, I want to say this was at a 0.75 ratio, I think. Was it lower?
Yeah, it varied because of the different ratios for the senior buildings.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's around that, I think, in average.
And on this development, so the southern part, those all have parking lots in between each building so that it alternates between parking and greens. So those ones were kind of a non-issue. The ring of parking on the other side, you know, that's really providing the parking for the buildings adjacent to it. Those white buildings, like on the road south of the senior building, there are opportunities for parallel parking. On this project, the benefit was because it's a public street, that road is wide enough to allow for parallel parking on both sides. So it does provide those residents with an opportunity. It's not quite a 1-to-1. This is the largest project that we have collaboratively done with a place. And right now, the development team and the design team feels fairly confident about it. But we walked the site you know, I go out there every other week, and I walked it pretty recently from like, if I couldn't find parallel parking and I lived on the parking lot. It's a big site, but I think it's not that far to the building. Oh, and these buildings are all given access on both sides of the building. So if you have to park in the parking lot to minimize like walking around and then like double looping back, that was another strategy we took too.
And then for the senior building and for the ADA spaces, you know, those are strategically located close to the entries of buildings, you know, so that an able-bodied person like Dave can walk the whole from corner to corner, but like we try to, pay attention to those things. And then there's the mailbox and other amenities that, we also try to distribute them, the trash enclosures on the perimeter. And then just one final note about the parking is not just like the people on the east side over here are going to see parking. They're not. They're going to see all these layers of landscape, and then even in some instances the parking is sunk, so that you don't necessarily see cars as you're going through there. So even though it's the back, if you will, of the development, it still has a lot of intention of being a good neighbor. So.
Thank you. Okay, now I have a follow-up question about parking. Thanks, Sarah. Did you consider for the senior building drop-off zones for folks who are coming from other activities and resources and mobility challenges, where they can get dropped off at certain points closer to the entrance to that building? And then back to the landscaping conversation, I'm just wondering how you're taking into consideration kind of codes in terms of your landscaping and getting to that TCO and survivability of those plantings. It looks beautiful when it's freshly planted, but then you have the reality of people getting into trampling those beautiful plantings. And how do you make sure that you're putting things in that are going to survive in the long term? I think you mentioned in your session earlier about future proofing. And so how do you future proof that development for the landscaping in the long term?
Why don't I answer the senior question first? So I'm just gonna walk over here so I can point. So the senior building, part of the other logic behind its positioning up here is that the community building's here. So the senior dedicated parking actually exists on this lot, and the primary lobby for the senior building is right there. So there is actually dedicated drop off and pickup. When we do sites like this, the ADA requirements are calced for the whole site, but we do make sure that we're positioning a larger number of ADA stalls there. So that is the area for pickup and drop off. And the kind of logic there was that there is a lobby right here that looks directly out to that, so that if seniors are waiting, I believe Engage is the service provider for this. And in our working session with them, they said, they will have at times buses and vans that will take groups of seniors to events. So the idea was that we're giving them their lobby there, and the independent senior community room is also located there. So the concept was that the senior amenities are in that area of pickup and drop off.
And then in phase 2, since they're a little bit more scattered, there are loading spaces that are by code required that they need to be accessible. And so that would create opportunities for easier access. And then just really quickly about the planting, it goes back to what Dave was saying, is like really paying attention to those warranties and then holding the contractors to the fire. The issue sometimes, as mentioned, is the schedule is challenging, right? So I've had projects where we're planting in the middle of July, or we're planting in January where it's like freezing temperatures.
My question is, for a long time, is that once the tenants move in, especially for family-oriented buildings, planting, whether you plant them at the right time of year or not, you're trying to meet code requirements. But at the same time, how are you going to make sure that that property, as it's operating and continues to have the budget to replace plants, just kind of make that balance?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. In an ideal world, yes, you replace it and then you move on, right? But there are challenges, and so sometimes we do have follow-up conversations of like, do we need to change something? Do we need to adapt? And I think that the key to avoid that from happening is really paying attention to what those areas are, how they're designed. So like, yes, if you anticipate a high traffic area, let's put something more resilient there. And I love the concept of future proofing. I'm gonna steal that.
And I think, Miguel, I'm strangely, I might be able to answer this better because we've worked with Place, but we've also worked with a lot of other landscape architects. What I have noticed, I think, is, and this is what you're alluding to, is people will take the path of least resistance, right? If I want to get from point A to B, they're going to go, they don't care what's there. They don't care if you provided a walkway, they're not going to walk around it. What I have noticed in our work with Place is that, for instance, we've got this big field. So that field is intended that kids can walk on it, that planting there is, a surface that can be walked on and trampled on. When we get to that boss garden, I think, if I remember correctly, the final planting scheme, either the plantings are so large that they're sort of an obstacle that when they're mature, it's unlikely someone's going to try to walk through it. I think that's kind of the balance, right? It's those in-between sizes that I've noticed that tend to get trampled on. And I think that Place sort of inherently takes that into consideration, but I've noticed sort of it's the path to A to B, right? And being conscious of that and what are the plantings that are going there. And I have noticed through the work with them, it's sort of something that I think is ingrained in their thinking very often. And at other times, I think is maybe not as strong on some of our other partnerships.
A quick question on some of your folks' development. This is Anthony Arakaki with the Portland Community Reinvestment Initiatives. And have any of your projects incorporated like an early Head Start or an early childhood center into, and what are those requirements, especially for parking? And I know that early Head Start is particular because it's a federally funded program and they have specific architecture requirements. And I wanted to hear something on that.
Unfortunately, we have not personally done that yet. It is something that has been coming up. We've noticed on RFPs currently and new developments, and it's we're familiar with what the requirements are, but I don't think we can answer it with experience today, unfortunately. Sorry. I think we're at time, right? Well, thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you.